This is Luke Paulson, the Catholic Conservative, and welcome to the news of the week for March 14th, 2026. And if you enjoy these videos, do not forget to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe for more. Trump's Strongarms AI. Let us start domestically this week. When AI first came onto the scene, it said a lot of wacky and at some points horrible things. However, as with most technology, as time went on, the systems improved. Now the new complaint is that their systems are using too much power. Well, President Trump took action on that. He demanded that these companies pay for the power that they are using themselves. Worst case scenario, their rates or wait time goes up. These companies could build generators or put on solar panels. Not that the latter are actually effective, but I digress. Did you know that when houses were first wired for electricity, people thought that it would burn down all of the houses? New technology is always scary, but it leads to creative destruction. Just one more domestic issue before we start zooming out. Let us talk about Reverend Jesse Jackson's funeral. Politics at a funeral. I take you to Chicago, where the funeral of Reverend Jesse Jackson was held. His son requested that everyone leave their politics at the door. However, since there were 3 former presidents in attendance as well as Kamala Harris, and all of them suffer from Trump derangement syndrome, they had to spend their time bashing Trump and pushing their political ideologies. I do not know much about the Reverend's political alignment, as he never came across my radar. However, I will say that these 4 people were an utter disgrace at the surface. They are also the same people who say that President Trump has an ego. Now moving on from national news, I take you to look at the entire Western Hemisphere. The modern Monroe Doctrine. Kristi Noem has been forced to step down as Secretary of Homeland Security. This means that the fake news spent way too much time talking about the disobedient dog that was put down. Moving on. From what I can tell, the problem started with a series of advertisements which she claimed had President Trump's approval. However, she was not fired, but honestly got a bit of a promotion. Instead of just protecting America, she is now protecting the entire hemisphere. In 1823, President James Monroe declared that the Western Hemisphere was not open for colonization. He had no way to enforce this, but it has largely remained in place. President Trump put Kristi Noem in place to protect this hemisphere. After all, if our enemies set up shop on this side of the ocean, it could be very dangerous for the homeland. While we are on the international stage, let me take you to Spain. The Spanish deal. As the American military continues to fight in Iran, they need a home base, as it would be impractical to come back here. One solution was to set up some bases in Spain. They are an ally and a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. As such, it should not have been hard to convince them to help us. However, they decided not to, and thus President Trump took action. He threatened to cut off all trade to Spain until they capitulated, and they finally did. President Trump hit this nation where it hurt. Now consider that cutting off trade to Spain could affect the entire continent. Not only did Spain's leadership debate amongst themselves, the rest of the continent was probably calling Spain as well, begging for capitulation. Now, while this next story is mostly in Iran, I want to talk about the bigger issue. How to obliterate enemies. Using civilians as human shields is a war crime and is forbidden by the Geneva Convention. However, that does not stop the Muslims from using schoolgirls to protect missile launchers. It was reported that the United States bombed a girls' school in Iran. However, this is very misleading. Our automated systems took out a missile launcher after they shot at us. Recall that Palestine has been using the same strategy for years. Israel does not have the same technology that we do. Thus, they have to take out the missile launchers manually. This introduces human compassion into the equation. Israel could have completely wiped out the Palestinian terrorists if they abandoned their humanity and took out the missile launchers wherever they were. However, that is infinitely harder to do than to say. I would also like to point out that President Trump's strategy to take out the military in Iran was more successful than the strategies used by Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama. I wonder if the only reason that Israel is holding back is the same reason why our leadership held back then. Prolonged war makes more money for the military-industrial complex.
Beware the military-industrial complex.
Which means more campaign contributions or foreign aid. I leave you to debate that on your own time. Now, while Iranians and most of the world are celebrating, there are a lot of terrorists who are not, which means that the terrorist sympathizers are out in force. The protester was a Springboard. Imagine a media that is so corrupt that a terror attack could be filmed live, and they will still blame the people peacefully protesting the terrorists. That may sound like something out of the Twilight Zone, but that happened in New York. A man was protesting the conquest of New York by Muslims, when one of those he was protesting used him as a springboard to throw an improvised explosive device or IED into the crowd. By the grace of Christ Jesus, it did not go off. However, that did not stop Mayor Zohran Mamdani from blaming the protester, and CNN from calling the terrorist and his compatriot, quote, teenagers from Pennsylvania, close quotes. They are Hamas sympathizers who have no place in civilized society. Also, this was right outside Mamdani's residence. If it had been a Republican or a Christian who did this person would have been arrested before the story went to print. This is just like the killer in Austin who wore a property of Allah sweatshirt and an Iranian flag shirt underneath. Illegals vote for Democrats to bring more of these people over. As such, if illegals did not vote, we would be much safer. Trump stands firm. President Trump has vowed not to sign any legislation until the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, or SAVE Act, is on his desk. This is a bold move that is important to the health of our republic. I recently went to renew my driver's license. This was naturally quite difficult, as I had to drive all the way to the courthouse to get my birth certificate from them. It was a very grueling 30-minute process in all, and it was time that I will never get back. I think my sarcasm is improving. If you were not born here, you will not have a birth certificate. A passport is also an option, but illegals do not have that either. This will ensure that only Americans vote in elections. The Democrats, however, want the illegals to vote because they gave the illegals lots of free things. If you rob Peter to pay Paul, you can always count on Paul's vote. Democrats are more concerned with getting votes from illegals than Americans having jobs, making refineries great again. Thanks to President Trump and his administration, especially Lee Zeldin of the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, there is an oil refinery that is opening up in Brownsville, Texas. This is the first new refinery that has opened up in 50 years. The EPA was created by Richard Nixon in 1970 and has been killing jobs ever since. It is no surprise that the last refinery was built only 6 years after the EPA was created. The Obama administration's EPA defeated the Keystone XL pipeline, forcing oil to go by rail instead. Not only is this worse for the environment, it is more expensive. President Trump is ensuring that this refinery opens up and that Americans get jobs. After all, unlike the Democrats, he cheers for Americans, not illegals. I love that President Trump is standing firm. Someone else who decided to take a stand is Dr. Kent Hovind. Hovind sues for defamation. Dr. Kent Hovind has been accused of everything from being a tax evader to a wife beater to unmentionable crimes concerning children. Every single one of these has been debunked, but that will not stop his enemies from resurrecting them. Recently, he decided to start a defamation lawsuit against people who are bringing up these claims against him, as well as against his ministry, Creation Science Evangelism, and his Christian camp, Dinosaur Adventureland. Supposedly, he can add more names to the list. Now, if any of his detractors are watching this, all you have to do is stop defaming Kent Hovind. You can debate him on creation and evolutionism, or debunk the flat earth. Just leave the ad hominems out of it. It is my experience that those throwing out baseless accusations are generally guilty of exactly what they accuse. In the same vein, they accuse President Trump of not keeping America safe. Democrats versus Homeland Security. Democrats decided to cut off funding for the Department of Homeland Security. To the surprise of no one at all, the only Democrat who stood with Americans was John Fetterman. Again, his mind started to heal as soon as he gave support to Israel.
Coincidence? I think not!
Moving on, while we have multiple confirmed Iranian-inspired terror attacks inside our borders, while California is facing potential explosive drone strikes, while we have Iranian sleeper cells ready to invade America at a moment's notice, Democrats have decided to cut funding for the DHS. The same party that may still want to defund the police, the fact remains that Democrats just want the illegals inside, and they are not scared of the Intifada. However, they will be scared. Afterwards, so many will regret not having gone to Jesus for salvation. And while our military is fighting the Iranians, Democrats suddenly care about the cost of war. Penny-pinching Democrats. Hardly a day goes by without a political commentator telling us about the cost of Operation Epic Fury. I am not going to deny that it has been an expensive undertaking. But these are the same Democrats who fought tooth and nail against the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. The same Democrats who defend the leering centers to their last breath. And the same Democrats who did not bat an eye at any of the military aid to Ukraine. On the low end, the Ukrainian dictatorial regime has received $175 billion since February 2022. That averages out to about $44 billion per year. It costs roughly $540 to feed a child a school lunch for a year. Instead of supporting this war between two European dictators, there could have been over 324 million school lunches. That is enough to feed all 50 million school children lunches for 6 years. It is not about the money spent on the military campaign in Iran. It is about hating everything that President Trump does.
Maybe I'm just blowing smoke. Maybe I'm completely off my rocker, but that is just my opinion. And do not forget to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe for more. But before you go, on the left I have last week's video, but you may also enjoy the video on the right.